Hello to everybody watching live and on demand, and welcome to this Wix Talks Trends panel, Beyond NPS, the future of listening to your customers. And it's so lovely to see everyone tuning in today. So to kick things off, please could you just pop into the chat and let us know where in the world you're joining us from. And please do keep your thoughts and questions coming throughout, as we'd love you to join in the conversation too. So I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome over 500 of you to this panel, which is a collaboration between Women in CX and CoreMiner, the global leader in AI-powered conversation intelligence that helps organizations elevate customer experience. And clearly, this is a hot topic, judging by how many people registered, and for good reason, because the way we listen to customers is evolving so fast, and today's session is all about where we go next. We'll be exploring the key trends shaping voice of customer strategies in 2025 and beyond, based on insights from CoreMiner's latest white paper, The Future of Omnichannel CX. And one of the headline findings, which is despite all of the buzz around innovation, solicited feedback, traditional surveys and forms, is still the dominant method organizations are using to gather customer insights. In fact, 64% of global companies say the majority of their VOC data comes from surveys, which means that 36% are missing out on the rich, unsolicited feedback shared every day through customer interactions and conversations that could hold the real truth. The reports surfaced some serious red flags and even bigger opportunities, but let's start with the challenges. And the first one is the limits of traditional surveys. So despite multi-million-dollar investments, they're often returning low response rates, limited insight, and diminishing return on investment. And the stats that were quoted was an average around 5 to 15% response rate. There's definitely survey fatigue and lack of depth, as most responses come from people at the very extreme ends of feedback. So those that are very happy or very unhappy, meaning the silent majority and the middle ground, are often going unheard. And that we're seeing metrics-driven blind spots. So when NPS becomes shorthand for customer experience, it can create a culture of chasing scores rather than improving real experiences. And I'm sure that's many of us can relate to that. I know certainly in places I've worked, I could see that culture happening. But there is hope and real opportunity in this shift towards AI-powered insight. The smartest CX and contact center leaders are now blending solicited and unsolicited feedback using AI to personalize outreach and uncover richer, more meaningful insights from customer conversations across calls, emails, chats, social reviews, and more. So the message is clear. To future-proof our CX strategies, organizations really need to rethink how we're listening to customers, how we embrace tech, and how we can capture what really matters. And that's exactly what we're here to explore today. But if you haven't read the white paper yet, don't worry. We'll be sending it to your inbox after the session so you can dive into all of the juicy details. And I'll be your host today. So if anyone doesn't know me, I'm Claire Muscat, the founder and CEO of Women in CX, the world's first community for women working in customer experience and technology. And our mission is quite simply to unleash the power of women to lead the movement for human-centered business through content, community, education, and events just like this one. So let's see who is already joining us today. Oh, let's see. Oh, wow. So many people. I'm going to read a few out. Tracy in Chicago, Fiona in Oxford, Michelle in the UK, Tina in Denmark, Richard in Derby, Adele in Manchester. Wow. Christy, South Bend, USA. I don't know where that is, but it sounds exciting. Troy in Cornwall, Lorraine in Kentucky, Matteo in Milan. Wow. Got Tammy in Germany. Hey, Tammy. Jane in Ireland, Zach in Buffalo. Oh, wow. There are so many people. I can't keep going. Got someone from Finland, Sapna. Nalini in Trinidad and Tobago, Virginia in Delaware, Gemma in London, baby. My hometown. Toby in Las Vegas. What's someone in Italy? Johannesburg, Portland. Wow. Oh, Calgary. That is a truly international audience. Oh, and with the Ruth there as well from Tanzania. But we'll keep reading more of those out. So please do keep introducing yourself as we go along. But it's so wonderful to see you all. So today we've got 40 minutes for our panel discussion, followed by a live audience Q&A. So please do keep your questions and comments coming in, because we really do want you to be involved in this conversation too. So our behind the scenes team are going to be gathering them in for me, and I'll share as many as I can with our panelists towards the end. But before we dive in, I want to start by hearing from you. So here's a quick question to get us thinking. Do you think most surveys are truly about understanding the customer or just about generating a metric? So if you could comment in the chat, customer or metric, we're going to check back on those answers shortly. And yeah, I'll see what our panel has to say about that too. So before I introduce our incredible panelists, please allow me to set the scene for today's discussion by positioning this conversation. And that is that in 2025, the gap between what customers say and what organizations hear is wider than ever. Legacy metrics like NPS and CSAT may offer a snapshot, but they rarely capture the whole story. Likewise, today's customers are drowning in irrelevant surveys and ignoring them. I know I get them on a daily basis and I don't bother to answer them anymore myself either. So there are some big questions we really need to ask ourselves, and those are we relying too heavily on outdated, low response surveys? Are we missing critical insight from real conversations that are happening every single day? Are we optimizing for scores or for outcomes, which is far more important? And are we prepared for the ethical, strategic, and technological shifts that come with capturing unsolicited feedback? Those are just some of the questions we're going to be tackling today. But without further ado, let's meet our incredible panel. So representing financial services, we've got Kat Robinson, Customer Experience Director, who's ex-NatWest, Lloyds and Metro Bank. Representing healthcare and pharma, we've got Alejandra Arguelles, Director of CX Global Platforms at Pfizer. We've got our omnichannel conversation analytics expert, Megan Kipe, who's product marketing manager at CoreMiner. And last but definitely not least, a woman who is changing the game of VOC and retail, Georgina Nelson, CEO and founder of True Rating. So ladies, let's say hi. How are you all?
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited to have this debate, which I'm sure is going to get pretty lively. And I'm just reading in the chat now what everybody was saying. Oh, lots of metrics there. A few customers, a couple of people adding a little bit of extra flavour in there. Metric when CX, but when conflating with marketing becomes a metric. Jennifer saying it's generating a false positive that's meaningless. Oh, she hates NPS both in business and customer surveys. Yeah, it's definitely a divisive topic, isn't it? But I'm sure we'll get into that today. Brittany says a metric, writing questions that are easy to answer, but not enough white book space. I suppose that's to get the why, isn't it? Which is more important than the score. And Isabella saying it depends how the company's using the data, but sadly she thinks it's more about the metrics as well. And Sydney says 80-20 metric customer. So yeah, I think it's showing, isn't it, just with that straw poll with our audience today, that there certainly is a challenge with how we're currently capturing feedback. So let's get into it then. And I think we should start by getting some introductions from each of our panelists to share a little bit about yourselves. So I'm going to pick on Kat to start. So if you could give us your brief introduction, but also if you'd like to answer the question I just asked the audience, do you think most surveys are about understanding the customer or just generating a metric? I'd love to hear from each of you on that one too.
Sure, fab. Thanks, Claire. So I'm Kat Robinson. I'm representing T Financial Services today. I've over 20 years working across retail and commercial banking in mainly customer experience and product roles. And I'm all about developing, delivering products and services that customers love, that make their lives better. I'm going to give a real sit on the fence answer, Claire, because I think it is a metric, but I think it needs to be because of sometimes now in a really positive way, where and how it's being used. Sort of, well, maybe we'll get into that kind of later in the discussion.
Yeah, I think you have to give us a bit more on that in a little while. So Alejandra, tell us a little bit more about you.
Hello, good morning, good evening. Thanks for having me here. So representing pharma industry, I'm the Global CX Excellence at Pfizer. Me and my team are focused on building personalized experience that also align to the customer's to the company's vision and values. I have a background in medical affairs and in omnichannel excellence, but expertise in strategy and on the delivering and implementations of voice of customer programs. Regarding the questions, I think all companies are very interested and invested on trying to listen to what their customers want to say. But understanding why they are saying it and sharing it with you, that is a whole different story. The ones that achieve it are actually going to be the ones that are going to be able to craft those meaningful connections to the customers, those that drives the satisfaction, the loyalty, and in the long run, drive the sustainability of a business success. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of chasing the metric. That is why I'm very excited to join this panel and listen to what these other amazing CX professionals have to say and what our audience share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandra. And I'm going to go to George next. Who's on mute?
See how many times that happens. I'm Georgia Nelson, founder and CEO of True Rating. And True Rating was born from much of the frustrations which Claire went through. The fact that retailers and businesses all over the world were struggling with irrepresentative samples of consumers in their feedback. They were hearing from the minority, the really happy or the really angry. It wasn't timely. And ultimately, when we spoke to CX professionals, they felt that they often couldn't action the data because it wasn't tied to meaningful business metrics. It just stood alone as an answer to a survey. So what we built is the ability for every consumer to feedback super simply and super quickly by leveraging the payment device in store, so where you tap your card, or online at payment, and just those simple touch points in that moment. We just ask one question, rotated from a set, or it can respond to what's in the basket. And ultimately, we get to hear from 80% of customers, so a far more representative base. And we tie it to those metrics, which I believe really matters. So how is that customer influencing how much someone spends, how often they return, etc.? And that's when the rubber really hits the road. And so I probably answered the question in my introduction of True Rating, really. But ultimately, I think a metric which stands alone, like NPS, is pretty meaningless. I think you really have to understand the context and what's actually driving it and get to a deeper level. But to truly understand a customer through a survey, like how many questions do you need and how many people are actually going to give you that time and respond? So I really think it's a balance, which the whole industry is grappling with at the moment. So excited to discuss it all further.
I was on mute that time. I'm sure we'll come back to that point about relevance as well, right? So basing a question on what is actually in the basket is way more relevant than randomized questions, isn't it, as well? So I'm sure we'll pick back up on that in today's conversation. And last but definitely not least, Megan.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. I am Megan Kipe, and I am a product marketing manager at CallMiner. So I'm responsible for driving awareness of adoption of conversation intelligence solutions through messaging and go-to-market activities. So I lead sales enablement in my role, create marketing assets, and support CallMiner's product launches. And I'm really excited for this conversation today. And to answer the question, I think it's definitely a bit of both. I think organizations are definitely chasing that metric, but they're also really, really interested in customer feedback. But like George said, how are they supposed to get that customer feedback from a short survey? They're not able to kind of understand the whole customer experience just from a short survey. So excited to talk about this topic further today.
Love it. So to your point there, Megan, about things being boiled down to strictly numbers, my first question is going to be, how can CX professionals ensure that customer feedback mechanisms capture the depth and nuance of customer experience, moving past those merely quantitative scores? And Kat, I'm going to pick on you first, but ladies, please do feel to chime in if you've got anything to add.
Thanks, Claire. I think I've kind of alluded slightly to my answer to the first part of this anyway, kind of in my setup, but two sort of link thoughts and perspectives. So I think it's absolutely fabulous nowadays, actually, that most organisations have the customer on their balanced scorecard, alongside commercials, risk, colleagues, etc. That wasn't the case 15 to 20 years ago. But I think we have to accept in being there, kind of it has to be a number, and it's a number. Because what gets measured gets done. And also, if you have a customer metric that's feeding into, so in my world, kind of a bank's overall scorecard that feeds things like bonuses, it has to not only be a number, but it has to be a number that you hit or you don't hit. And even better, if that number can be comparable to other sectors and other organisations. I think hence why so many of us, and certainly businesses I've worked in, in the near past, end up with NPS. But I think then the trick for us as CX professionals is to know and to shout really loudly internally about there not just being one tool for the job. So it's not just that, and I think, again, other panelists have already alluded to this, it's not just NPS. To really get into the kind of detail and the nuances around the customer and around CX, you really need to have a kind of a multi-metric CX view or kind of dashboard, if you like, that's actionable and can drive improvement. I'm sure I'm not the only person in the session today who's, been managing to an NPS number that's gone, when it's going up, no one cares. But when it's going down, everyone's all over you and you don't really know, because as Megan's already said, you haven't got the drivers. And that can be really challenging. So I think those border drivers alongside NPS are really important. And I love, shameless plug for John Sills. I know he's a friend, Claire, of Women in CX, but I think almost thinking about the customer and customer experience along that kind of insight wedge. So I think there is a place at this end for NPS and CSAT about your product and service, but you also need to get into your customers and their broader lives, really, to really understand them and to really, I think that's where the magic happens and how you can really move CX forward for your customer and the experience they have of your business.
Yeah. So just to summarize that then, we need to have the thick end of the wedge in terms of understanding our customers more holistically, their needs, their goals, the key drivers of their experience. And the thin end of the wedge is over here with the metrics and the surveys and whatever other insight mechanisms and feedback mechanisms. But what we should also be doing is joining those two things together, right? So are we delivering those outcomes for our customers, and to what degree are we doing that?
For sure. And I think that the thing about there being one metric is in many ways fabulous. The organisations care enough about the customer now that we are in the balanced scorecard for the business, I think is fabulous. So we need to sort of harness that and bring those broader things, as you said, to kind of really understand the overall picture.
Okay. Has anyone got anything to add to that? And I can see there are questions popping in to the chat already around what you just said, Kat, in that first statement. So we'll come back to those definitely at the end.
Well, definitely building up on what Kat was mentioning, NPS, CSAT can certainly bring and be the drumbeat of your CX program. It is very interesting how you mentioned the drivers. You need to associate that NPS to the drivers of that experience. Is this the knowledge of your frontline customer facing person? Is this the user experience that they're achieving on their website? And start adding, but in a very practical way, is leverage all the opportunities to get qualitative feedback from your customers, whether it's the open-ended question associated to that, whether there's an opportunity to have some one-on-ones or focus groups. So that is going to enrich the depth of the insights, and it will also let your customers know that their voice matters beyond the structured questions and solicited feedback.
And I was just thinking, I'm surprised George hasn't chimed in talking about the financial metrics, because I just saw the question, what else is on the multi-metric NPS dashboard? I think that's the third thing, isn't it? It's how we connect it back to business outcomes as well. George, have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'd say that, NPS, what's your likelihood to recommend, as we all know, that's pretty meaningless when you give that to the operations team as to how they can go and make that better. As we've talked about their key drivers, we've found that businesses who've, they've had a board who've reported NPS to the street for absolute years, and they come to us, and yes, we can ask NPS questions in our rotation, and we do, but we rapidly see that that's not what actually is driving people to spend more and return more often. It's usually the behavior of the frontline staff, and that's what or it's the product mix, or it's value, etc. And that's what can be actioned on, and that's what rapidly replaces NPS on that scorecard, because it's something which they know that their behavior can impact, and they can change, and they can see that rise. So I think I think tying each metric to financial outcomes is such an imperative to getting the company behind it and seeing the impact of pushing forward with that change.
And I noticed Isabella and Veronica were both mentioning NSS, so net sentiment score, measured by analysing open-ended answers as a way to expand NPS's power. Is that something that everybody in the has heard of, NSS, net sentiment score? That's a newer one on me. But yeah, I think that kind of the open-ended questions, asking why, asking for further feedback. I think the audience is saying, just as an example, how that kind of tool and analytics is helping us to do that. Oh God, everyone's got a lot to say already. Wow. Thank you, everyone. Keep your comments coming. I think Danielle just mentioned really appreciating Kat's point about what gets measured gets done and having the value. Yeah, the enterprise has the value on the scorecard. Not perfect or sufficient. Yeah. But there are true downsides to not having the customer represented at all. Oh, I can't believe how much the chat is popping off over here. Meg is in the background helping me collect those answers. So please star all of those, Meg. We're going to have to speed through our questions and get to the audience's ones. They're actually way more interesting. So moving on to real-time insights then. What are the benefits and potential challenges of implementing AI-driven feedback systems that analyse unsolicited customer interactions? And Megan, I'm going to ask you if you would like to answer that one first for us.
Yeah, before I answer, we want to spend just a minute just defining unsolicited feedback so we're all on the same page?
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll just offer a brief definition and then anyone else on the panel can chime in. Unsolicited feedback just refers to data from conversations that occurs through calls, chats, emails, or even reviews or even social media posts, and it occurs voluntarily, unlike surveys, which requests customer feedback in just a more structured way.
Yeah, that's a good leveler. So yeah, I'm going to ask the audience actually, is anyone already using unsolicited feedback? If you'd let us know in the chat as well, that'll probably help us with our conversation too. So what do you what are the pitfalls then, or the potential challenges and benefits, Megan?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of benefits to unsolicited feedback. I'll just kind of highlight two. So first, I think is just unbiased data collection. So since the feedback is unsolicited, it often reflects genuine customer opinions without that bias. So typically, survey respondents, like we said, are typically very happy or they're typically very upset. So like a survey only approach means that you might miss out on the general sentiment of the majority of customers. And then the second benefit I would highlight is this idea of emerging trends. So conversation intelligence tools can detect patterns or emerging trends from unsolicited feedback that might not be captured through structured surveys or feedback forms. And then there lies the challenge with unsolicited feedback. It's just the sheer volume of data that a human may have to sift through to gather customer insights. But like I said, conversation intelligence tools, CallMiner is one of them, can take some of that burden off of the human analyst.
Yeah, and Alejandra, I think I remember you telling me about a really great example about how unsolicited feedback's helping you with customer journey.
Well, it's really bringing the customer journey to life. You're gonna build and replicate your customer journey, and you're gonna be able to identify all of the touch points where you can proactively go and say, hey, how am I doing? You're gonna send a survey, you're gonna send that solicited feedback. But there's a high number of touch points where you're not gonna be able to go and ask at every touch point, how are you doing? So on that point, to be able to sift through a vast majority of data, like right now it was being mentioned, social media, blog comments, certain touch points that required sifting quickly, that require for you not to have that manual constraint of the time that it takes to do the analysis, and that you are not able to scale the solution. That is where the AI technologies have come very useful and are being the game changer to act very rapidly to those emergent trends, to be able to react, and to react with value, to react with a personalized experience, because you were able to identify those trending preferences. So identifying those touch points where you cannot go and proactively ask where you're doing, but leverage the technology so they can help you identify, that is where it has come more useful for us. And we're able to scale the solution globally because of the use of this technology that we're leveraging.
Yeah, I'm loving how you can create more of a 360-degree view of the customer and their most recent interactions, and then personalize, as you said, the experience. But it can even help with the survey, can't it? So being able to use AI as a tool to choose which question based on the context of that experience. And I saw a really great example from the Core Miner report, which was talking about, let's say a customer has an issue and you're aware that there was an issue, but whilst the call center is actually dealing with that, the AI can generate an option for the customer about how they would like it to be resolved. So by the time the loop is closed, you already know what that customer wants to resolve their problem. So if it's a refund or, I don't know, replacement of product, creating that way more seamless, optimized and more efficient experience, I guess, on the back end as well from an operational point of view. Ooh. And there's the chat is so popping off right now. So yeah, ladies, I'm loving how you're bringing in the chat comments to your answers as well.
It's Claire, just on that point, it's what we've seen really across channels. Obviously online, via digital, it's far easier for you to add qualitative comments than when it is when you're standing paying for something in a store. And so that's where we get a lot of that qualitative, and just being able to leverage AI to see the trends of what people are saying, whether it's post-purchase when they're at home and have had their goods delivered, or online, etc. And actually saying, is this a latent problem in the business, across the business, which we need to measure? Is it impacting a huge number of people? And ultimately, is that affecting their loyalty and how much they spend? And so you can now build AI to look at the responses you're getting in other channels, and then in real time put questions out to actually test whether that's a problem on another channel. So I think it's so powerful, and being able to build a real time conversation across channels with consumers. So you're really evolving in real time with what people are saying. It's still when everyone has all these tools available, I still just find it quite incredible when I speak to businesses and they're like, it's an absolute mission to change our questions with our current provider. It takes 6 months, and it just means that people aren't able to keep on the cusp of changing consumer trends and really riding that conversation.
Really doing something about it. I can sense there's a strong concern around ethics and legality, especially from Jennifer Lyons. I know Pat's popped in an answer about how to ensure you deal with that, but we are going to come on to a question about the ethics around using unsolicited feedback shortly. So don't worry, audience, that one is coming. So if we think about balancing the human touch with automation then, because a lot of this technology is making it sound like the human is completely coming out of the loop altogether. I don't think that's true, but how can organizations maintain genuine human connections with customers whilst leveraging so much automation in their feedback tools? Megan, as our resident technology expert and closest to the tech that is actually doing this from Core Miner's point of view, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a personalized approach is so important. And I think organizations can maintain this by utilizing a really balanced approach that leverages technology but provides a personalized, empathetic experience. For example, companies can ensure that an individual, a customer, can reach a real person, especially for like an overly complex or even a personal issue like we see in banking or we see in pharma. Just reaching a real person if needed. That balancing that technology with the human element really fosters empathy and trust. In addition, AI can flag critical issues for that human follow-up as well.
Muted again. And Natasha Jones in the chat, I think just really echoed that sentiment really around, you can't rely solely on unsolicited feedback, just like you can't rely solely on surveys, right? So I think what we're all agreeing on here is it's a combination of methodologies, isn't it? We're not saying it's one or the other, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, NPS and surveys have their limitations, but actually if you can combine that with unsolicited feedback. That's where the real power is, and ensuring that there is always a human in the loop when it comes to those more complex, difficult, emotional conversations or problems or issues that need to be dealt with. That isn't where you want to be jumping straight to automation, for sure. And yeah, go on, Megan.
Oh, I was just saying, I love the idea, like you said, Claire, of human in the loop. For example, a good example of this is, you're having a conversation, say it's a chat conversation with an AI agent, a bot, and then being able to transfer to a live human agent and having all of the context of that interaction. So that human agent isn't missing a beat. You're not asked to repeat yourself. I think that's a good example of that. And that can be something that can be implemented with technology.
Yeah. And I think somebody had mentioned right up at the top, hadn't they? Something similar about that, Megan. Can you recall that comment, Meg? I think it might be on my starred ones. Yeah. No, sorry, I can't find that now.
There's been so many comments. It's hard to keep track.
I know, it's going crazy. Has anyone got anything else to add to that about the balancing the human touch? I was going to say, Kat, like you've been how customers are finding it.
I think that applies to both how you solve problems for the customer, but also insights. So going back to my dashboard part up front and recognizing that different things are for different purposes. So I think customers take a lot of comfort from being able to talk to a human, like you said, particularly on those more complex problems. But also when you think about insight, I think there's something fabulous in people from an organization directly engaging with customers, kind of getting close to customers, what have you. But that doesn't replace more quantitative data you might want for other purposes. I'm not going to sign off a business case for a big CX program based on the conversation I had with Bob the plumber last week, but Bob the plumber might give me some really fabulous insight that's going to make me think differently about my product and service. So I think there's kind of absolutely a place for both, and it's just using the right tool kind of for the right job, isn't it? Either to help the customer or to understand the customer and kind of what they want.
Yeah. Anyone else any thoughts to add to that one? There's a question that pops up there. I think maybe we can answer that now. What does human in the loop actually mean in reality? Who is doing it? Lisa was Nika asked. Megan, I think that's just another explanation of a term, if that's okay. We'll send that one to you.
But I don't know about anyone else or if anyone else has thoughts around this, but when I say human in the loop, I really do mean human. So using AI technology, using voice bots, but keeping that human in the loop, either with the context of that conversation or actually transferring to a live agent and having them pick up. So that's what I mean by it. I know there might be other definitions as well.
So who's doing the human in the loop? So there'd be technology and automation that would drive to a person. They'd get an alert or some kind of notification saying you need to do this. And when things like conversation summaries or context or background is generated by AI, that's then something that the human reads, interprets, and then relays.
Yeah, that's what I think. I'm curious to get other perspectives and points of view on this as well. It's kind of a new term, right? AI kind of blew up in 2024. So we're coming up with all of these terms and ways to referring to technology now in a very short amount of time. So curious at other perspectives.
Well, that wasn't actually what Lisa was asking. She's just told me in the chat comments that she didn't actually mean we needed to explain the term. Apologies, Lisa. That was my fault. I'm human and I didn't interpret that correctly. But companies out there doing this in reality, so using AI technology in customer feedback, can we mention any company names? So Pfizer, you're doing it already, aren't you?
I mean, the part of starting to work with some algorithms and training it, that is very useful. I haven't used the term human in the loop before. I'm loving the definition, Megan. But actually being able to leverage this technology, but having the human part that is going to help you train the algorithm to start distinguishing noise from signals. That is where the true value, and what it's right now, all companies are learning how to do this effectively and fast. There's a lot of irrelevant comments that may pop up, a lot of noise out there. So we need to keep on training and learning how to improve and how to be very effective to really be able to extract those valuable signals from out of that universe of noise. So we're learning, and I think that several of the companies are in that initial steps of doing this effectively.
Yeah, and I think design is going to be an incredibly important capability, isn't it, to build in terms of thinking about how you bring these things to life, how they touch the customer, what the experience even of those feedback loops and human in the loop would be. So moving swiftly on, I'm going to stay with you, Alejandra, and we are going to now touch on the ethical considerations. So I'm sure the audience would love to know, because we saw it coming up time and time again in the chat already, exactly what ethical considerations should be taken into account when collecting and analysing unsolicited customer feedback, especially concerning privacy and consent. And I know in the UK we have GDPR, which I'm assuming some of the audience are thinking, well, how do you actually do this in practice without breaking any kind of laws?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yes, it's critical to the business to prioritize all the ethical considerations in twofold: the ensuring consent and protecting privacy. Some key aspects that we could like list down and to be very practical to this approach is, first of all, transparency. Clearly communicate how feedback is going to be collected, analyzed, and used. How the customer should be aware of your data collection practices and the purposes. And consent is very straightforward. To request a consent when you're gathering solicited feedback, you're going to have a survey, you're going to request information, you need permissions, you have your legal disclaimer at the initial section of your survey. That is a must. That is very straightforward for everything. The challenge comes when you are trying to communicate that consent and gather that informed consent on unsolicited feedback and all those types of sources. So you need to know that even for publicly shared feedback, you should try to do your best to consider mechanisms to inform the customers that the typical, you're going to be collecting this for training and quality purpose. Those magic two words are on the consent. You need to respect the rules of the platforms that you're collecting those from. You need to be informed on that. And data anonymity always helps. If you don't need the data, the exact data and information of your customers to make the strategic decision, well, then don't collect it. Minimization of the data that you need to collect, that would definitely help to protect the individual identities and mitigates a lot of privacy risks. Security, super important. You are responsible to protect the data that you collect. That ensures the customer's trust and also complies with the legal and regulation, which leads to the other very tricky part. This is new. AI rules, laws, and ecosystems are evolving, and customer preference are evolving on where they share the feedback and how they share it. So you need to stay on top of your game. You need to stay informed. And if in your company you have the legal and regulatory and compliance teams, you need to make them informed on a very early stage on what are your strategies, how did you design your customer experience, and how do you design your listening programs. So they're involved early, they're upskilled on these new legal and compliance and regulations. And as I was telling you a moment ago, honor the terms of services and privacy policies of the platforms where you are collecting those unsolicited feedback. So I hope that this bulleted approach can help you like set the stage. But the message is, this is evolving so fast that what it's right now very regulated might change because we have new and emerging technologies that you need to adapt, but always keeping the customer trust.
I think I might have lost Alejandra there. But that was all super helpful. I think, depending on your industry, the regulatory compliance, the policies within your own company, and calling in the experts, right? So where you've got regulatory and compliance expertise within your organisation, getting close to them and working that out together seems fundamentally critically important. And I think there's a really good point there about, if you don't need to collect the data, and I think from what Pat was saying in the chat earlier, that anonymizing everything, then that reduces any concerns and risks that might come your way. Well, I can't believe it. We're only got 20 minutes left, so I think we're going to have to speed into some faster rounds for our last couple of questions. So I know this is coming up in the chat again already, and how do we then integrate feedback into strategy? So what are the most effective ways to incorporate real-time customer feedback into the broader business strategy and decision-making process? Kat, I'm going to come to you for a snap answer.
Well, I can do quick, Claire. I think it's two ways. So I think the feedback needs to be kind of outside in and inside out, if that makes sense. So outside in, as in, insight from the customer to shape the strategy up front. And that's where I think all, going back to my point on dashboard earlier, all types of insight need to be there. And actually that's where, but I think particularly unsolicited feedback can be really powerful. So what are the things you don't even know are bugging or an issue for your customer yet? But then I think also once you have a strategy, it's about kind of inside out, how you can test and challenge the strategy and its delivery to make sure it's delivering what the business thinks it will for its customers. And then I think the challenge on top of that for us as CX professionals is just how we can get really creative and imaginative, if you like, about sharing that with the business. So more kind of immersive events for kind of senior leaders rather than just lots of pages of numbers and PowerPoint decks and presentations, I think. So I think we're called to arms for all of us perhaps to be a bit more creative about how we do that to influence strategy.
Yeah, I love that. And if we had more time, I could tell you some examples of what I'd done in my days at Sainsbury's to do that, but I think we'll have to save that for another call. So 2 more questions to go before we're over to audience Q&A. I think a big one for us to answer today is about future-proofing feedback strategies. So how can CX leaders design feedback mechanisms that are adaptable to rapidly changing customer expectations and technological advancements? George, I'm going to come to you for that one.
Yeah, I'd say there's such a crisis in the CX industry about trying to hear from Gen Z, for example, who are completely disengaged with surveys. And so I really think it's about thinking of a method which means that you're going to hear from the vast majority of your customer base. So whatever that channel. And for us at True Rating, we found just being really conscious of people's time, promising them anonymity, which we found is really important. And just really simple and quick in the moment. And so then we hear from 50% of people online, 80% of people in store, and in real time and in the moment means that leaders can get that data to see how their customers are evolving. I think it's around, as I pointed to, how you can leverage AI to be really flexible and keep on the cusp of what you're seeing in the data. If you see a dip in service, for example, knowing that you can quickly fire other questions to deeper dive into what those issues are. If you see people not showing their loyalty card, what's changed? And so I guess it's just that moving away from that quarterly EBR presentation where people talk about what customers have been saying for the last 3 months to actually building a culture of people constantly listening, constantly responding, and constantly evolving. And I obviously talk with my retail hat on, but I always go on to that every store's a snowflake. And I think there's a danger of often at CX looking at everything from a brand level, but customers are so different in different geographies, different neighborhoods, etc. And so I really think ensuring that you build that culture of understanding at a granular level how you're influencing that customer experience, and then you concentrate on the base and that lifts up. So
yeah, no, that's super helpful. For me, I think as well, it's about being flexible and modular, isn't it? So I think it kind of fits in with your tech stack strategy as well. So being able to switch things on easily, to be able to have the capability in the future to be able to listen in different channels, so that as trends, behaviors, customers, technology changes, that you just aren't limited to one system or one solution. That will mean a bigger investment in the future as well. So I think for me, future proofing is about ensuring that whatever you're building has a modular approach and it's flexible for the future too. So last question, and this one I think is probably bringing it back home again to the metric side of customer insight. So measuring success in like these future evolved feedback systems, what metrics or indicators should organizations use to assess the effectiveness of modern AI-driven mechanisms compared to traditional surveys? So if we imagine in today's world, we've got kind of the CSAT, the NPS, the customer effort score type world. Is there something that we're going to need in the future that helps to measure that effectiveness? Are we going to have more acronyms, do you think? Anyone can feel free to chime in on this one.
I mean, I still feel CSAT and NPS, as I was mentioning at the beginning, are going to be the ones that are going to tell you the drumbeat of your program. You can still keep your NPS and CSAT as a AI-driven, data-driven, unsolicited feedback assessment, like how was your NPS and CSAT before and now after that you implement all those in-depth insights, but also start to add some operational data. Are you getting feedback faster? Are you getting this data? Are you taking more agile data-driven decisions? I mean, the operational aspect, is this improving? And finally, all the new items that Megan commented, the sentiment, the really fast trends, but very aligned to those voice of customers beyond the structured data, like sentiment, trends, emotions, preference. Those would be the ones that we would need to start adding as our new KPIs also.
Yeah. I think, Claire, there's something about representativeness or inclusivity. I guess the hope is by using some of these tools, we're not relying on, a response rate of 3% from disgruntled customers, sort of to Megan's point earlier. So I think success would be we're actually hearing from more of our customers because we're using a combination of these different types of tools, and that would be success. Or that would certainly be something to track for me to understand kind of how it's working.
So kind of like customer engagement.
You can use True Rating. We'll talk after.
Shameless plug there. Okay, so let's go to our audience questions now then. And gosh, I don't know which to choose because we've had so many. So I'm going to do Rebecca's question first. Curious to know the thoughts of the panel on continuing to use NPS strictly for benchmarking with competitors, whilst using more extensive VOC program metrics to fill in the actionable details and feelings of the customer. That had 7 reactions from the audience. So I think that sounds like a question lots of people are asking. I don't know why I'll go, George.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I'm not whether it's directly answering this question, but just we've heard from a billion consumers now through True Rating. So we've got a fair bit of data, and obviously NPS has been a very popular question. And it's really interesting to see that NPS scores are always higher in lighthouse, brands which people want to affiliate themselves with. And so if you think about what's your likelihood to recommend, people will always give higher scores to
Waitrose,
fashion brands, etc. Whereas even though the discount stores might be doing exceptionally well, and these people are coming back to them time and time again and taking a large part of their wallet share, they actually think, would I recommend this to my friends and family? I'll just keep it as my dirty secret. And so I think you have to look at NPS with that view of human fallibility as well, and keep that in mind when you're benchmarking.
Gatekeeping the secret value-led brands. I'm not going to tell you about it. I'm going to keep it all to myself. But I think it was off the back of something you said, Kat, when that question from Rebecca came through.
I think for as long as I guess I totally hear George's point about category. I guess obviously if I channel with my financial services hat on, I think for as long as organisations want to differentiate on service proposition, I want to be the best bank for X, then I have to have some way to compare myself to the competition, I think. And whilst NPS is flawed, I think it could be another measure. But I think NPS now is so common, such common parlour, isn't it? That it's an obvious one to just bench yourself against others. Totally hear that if you start doing that across category, George, you get some weird results. But if I'm a bank who wants to be the best bank for customer service in branches or something, I've got to have some kind of way to measure that. And I think NPS is just easy because everyone understands it and most people track it, being sort of pragmatic about it.
Yeah.
And then there's a interesting one from Tammy about thoughts on metrics being linked to incentives or bonus, or should the incentives rather be linked to actions or behaviour that will drive NPS and CSAT up? Anyone got an opinion on that?
I've seen this really bad action in not a bank I work in, but elsewhere, where literally I've been to the counter and made a transaction, and as I've left, the person's basically said to me, "Can I just ask what rating you're going to get a survey on the back of this interaction? And I'd love to ask you what kind of rating you're going to give me and why you wouldn't give me a 9 or a 10." And I was just like, "Oh God!" as I left. So I think in a way, if you step right back, encouraging organisations to focus on improving customer experience, tick, tick, tick. But I think it's just how granular you take that, isn't it? If you're incentivising individual colleagues around NPS based on a really relatively small sample size, I think that gets quite dangerous, doesn't it? And can drive quite dysfunctional behaviour. Either my interaction with the branch staff, or I've certainly sat in call centres where the agent at the end of the call gets to choose who the NPS survey gets sent to versus not. And fairly obviously, they direct it mainly at positive calls. So I think at the more granular level, it can encourage some kind of quite dysfunctional behaviour, can't it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I went to Wagamama's a couple of weeks ago with my friends and had an exceptionally flirtatious waiter who then at the end asked me what I was going to rate him on the survey. I was so disappointed. But yeah, I think kind of that driving the wrong behaviour is dangerous, isn't it? And there's a super quick one from Lorraine Dote. Does NPS have any place in B2B? I guess you guys are more customer facing, aren't you? I would say, in my experience, it has little relevance if you don't understand what the key driver of your business customer is. So with one organisation I worked with as a consultant recently, the most important thing was being easy to do business with, not would you recommend us. So I think my recommendation would be to always ensure that you've spent that time in discovery in understanding your customers' key drivers. And just because NPS is the usual metric, don't be afraid to try something different to test the most important thing for your customers. We've got more questions coming in still. They're running through. So Natasha, I think this is a point of clarification for, is it that NPS and CSAT will always be important in terms of quantifying CX, but the new tech will help us better understand the drivers and uncover opportunities? From our conversation today, what would you guys say?
Well, I think definitely NPS and CSAT still have a place here. We need to use them correctly, combining with the drivers of experience, combining with the sentiment of those open-ended responses and the unsolicited feedback analysis, because that is going to lead then to truly actionable insights. Now you take the conversation one step further. Okay, you got all of this listening, amazing programs, great analytics. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't take action, or that you take action and the customer doesn't even notice that you took action. You need to now start thinking on how you're going to be activating those closed loop feedbacks. Also bringing this a little bit to the conversation. You have some closed loop feedbacks that imply a rapid response and closing that alert, whether good or bad, with your customers, and educating and training your frontline customer facing team to address this and get that conversion and get that client satisfied. And then you got your closed loop feedback that involves a more outer loop process, which is the one that is going to take those decisions and steer the company's strategies towards improving a process, where massively you're seeing that your customers are getting the items on your cart, but they're just leaving them there. What is happening there? Are you listening to your customers there? Is the form wrong in your page? Is it too costly to ship the item? What is happening there, and how are you going to be improving that? But that is the most process level closed loop feedback. So combining those is going to give you the elements to craft and to design that end part of the experience and close the loop effectively.
Yeah, I love all of these. I'm just thinking, like, looking at the questions in the chat, there are so many that I think we could create whole topics around. And clearly, I'm taking this as unsolicited feedback and insight for what Women in CX Talks Trends do next, because clearly there is a real need to continue this. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and to ensure that we satisfy in real time some of the feedback we've received, which said the open discussion is very helpful. It'd be great to have some practical steps or tips to go beyond this, any key points to summarize. I'm going to bring us to our final question, that is, if you could leave our audience with one kind of key takeaway or top tip for how to move beyond NPS, what would that be? So that's a final question to help us round this out in the last few minutes. And you're also polite, you're waiting for me to pick on somebody, aren't you? I'm going to say, Megan, if you'd like to go first, what's your top takeaway?
I think we've already said it in this discussion, but I would say to truly understand the customer experience, we have to look beyond these metrics like NPS and CSAT and, seek authentic, nuanced feedback that genuinely captures genuine feelings and sentiment. That would be my top takeaway, but I know we've already said that in this discussion.
That's good. George?
Yeah, I'd say just think about the consumer in customer experience. And too often I speak to CX individuals who've never actually filled in a survey. And so I think it's just taking that time to actually think about all these different channels and whether you would engage in them. And if not, why not? And to build a system where you are going to make it really, really simple and easy for people to engage in your brand.
Yeah, nice. And Alejandra?
Well, future-proofing requires a flexible approach. Leverage AI, leverage machine learning, so you keep your feedback mechanisms relevant and effective, so you can continue to drive strategic decisions in your company, but flexible. The adaptability and the flexibility of your organization and your CX strategy would be key on the next months.
Yeah, it's going to keep evolving, isn't it? I think this is just the beginning of a big shift, and who knows where we'll be in just 5 years' time at the rate the technology is changing everything. I agree with that one. And Kat, last from you.
I think for me, it's almost that smorgasbord, if you like, of insight. So, solicited, unsolicited, qual, quant. I think it still has NPS and CSAT in it, but maybe these other things that can help you really understand what's going on and making sure that more people across your organisation have access to that. I think at the moment there's a danger that you said up front, Claire, that one person looks at NPS and they think that's everything. So I think it's how do we get out there as CX professionals and kind of champion that right across the business so people see more of it, more of the data.
Yes. Awesome. So we are unfortunately out of time, and there are so many brilliant questions. It really has given us food for thought, and we will take your feedback and think about how we can respond to some of those challenges in future events and content. But we must say a final thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you so much. And to our awesome sponsor, Coal Miner, for helping us on our mission to challenge the status quo and ensure that women's voices are at the centre of important industry conversations like this. And of course, a huge thank you to our audience, everyone who joined us today. You've been amazing. And I know this is going to sound ironic, but I've just popped a link to a feedback survey in the chat. But it's just 3 questions. If you could just let us know what you thought of today's panel. We are practicing what we preach, and we would really love your feedback. But I also noticed there were some lovely comments coming through about how different this felt in comparison to other conversations on this topic. So I'm going to take that as unsolicited feedback too. So don't forget, keep your eye on your emails to get access to the Coal Miner white paper. And with so many more Wix Talks Trends panel debates in the works, please make sure you're following us on LinkedIn, follow Women in CX, and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you know what's coming up and to hear be the first to hear all the exciting news from Women in CX. I'm a bit overwhelmed because I can't believe more than 500 people came to this. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everybody. It's been a real community effort. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks so much all.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.